Es en realidad un honor para mí estar aquí con todos ustedes, especialmente con las organizaciones ganadoras. Creo que le voy a hacer un trabajo un poco más fácil a los traductores, ¿verdad? En este momento. Bueno, sean todos muy bienvenidos. Estimado señor James Bratton, jefe de gabinete de la Oficina de Coordinación de la Planificación y Planificación de Políticas para Asuntos del Hemisferio Occidental del Departamento de Estado de Estados Unidos. Señor Thomas Jeffrey, representante oficial de este grant que estamos ejecutando. Organizaciones ganadoras del Empower Innovation Challenge, que son ustedes los principales invitados a este evento. Y tengo la oportunidad de mencionarlos. El Instituto Interamericano de Cooperación para la Agricultura, IICA, la sede de Guatemala, que ha sido ganador. Pacocha, de Ecuador. Sector 3 y ALPA, de Perú. Banca Alimentos, de Colombia. Ecotarcoles, de Costa Rica. La Fundación Centro Nacional de Producción Más Limpia, de El Salvador. Y el Foro Ambiental de Samaná, de República Dominicana. Así es que colegas y amigos de WEC, de NBC, de Bastel e Incubatec, sean todos bienvenidos. Como les digo, para nosotros como WEC es en realidad un honor el desarrollar este proyecto Empower Innovation Challenge que nos ha brindado esta oportunidad el Departamento de Estado. Agradecemos al Fondo de Acción de Equidad e Igualdad de Género del Departamento de Estado, que a través de ellos pues desarrollamos el presente programa. Quisiera hacer una breve mención que a principios del 2014 iniciamos nosotros con Caminos a la Prosperidad, luego pasamos a Caminos al Desafío o Challenge, donde desarrollamos el Poder para el Crecimiento, y todo esto nos llevó a desarrollar lo que es ahora la Red de la Innovación e Impacto, donde hemos venido contando con más de 30 organizaciones a lo largo de 11 países, las cuales vinieron ejecutando diferentes programas a lo largo de estos años. Ahora pues damos inicio formal con ustedes como primer grupo de 3 al Empower Innovation Challenge, donde sus proyectos llevarán a cabo actividades que apoyarán soluciones locales innovadoras para pequeñas empresas que son en ciertos casos propiedad de mujeres o lideradas por ellas y sus empleados, enfocándose en economía azul y verde para aumentar la capacidad para abordar las barreras sistemáticas de género para generar crecimiento económico sostenible en sus comunidades. A través de esta integración de ustedes como organizaciones y sus empresas MIPYMES que vendrán a ser las beneficiarias, y ustedes como nuevos miembros de la red en alianza con otros miembros activos de la red, que es parte de lo que nosotros buscamos, y en colaboración con otras partes interesadas, como Patricia ya mencionó, pues ahorita no somos tantas personas, pero entre poco vendrán otros representantes que están basados aquí en Guatemala, y de esta manera nosotros buscamos irlos vinculando a ustedes. Y como ya vieron que venimos desarrollando la Red de Innovación e Impacto, pues la idea es que ahora 8 nuevas organizaciones formen parte de la red, ¿verdad? Con esto buscamos desarrollar y fomentar estas alianzas para aumentar la sostenibilidad de sus organizaciones y, por supuesto, ir generando más impacto, ¿verdad? Ayudando pues a las MIPYMES y principalmente en las comunidades donde ustedes ejecutan sus diferentes programas. Con todo esto, pues, lo que pretendemos nosotros es desarrollar un acompañamiento. Esto será algo muy determinante que ustedes a lo largo de estos 12 meses donde ejecuten sus programas lo van a ir viendo. Ya Patricia mencionó las diferentes organizaciones que nosotros representamos, donde buscamos nosotros en una gran medida es que ustedes, pues, ya saben, y principalmente en los últimos días, han pasado una maratón de comunicación, ¿verdad?, en estos muy recientes días, además de pues, el proceso que llevamos a cabo del challenge, ¿verdad? Entonces, con todo esto, lo que nosotros buscamos es aportarles lo más que podamos, lo más que sea de valor para ustedes, y eso es algo que a nosotros como instituciones nos caracteriza, donde desarrollamos este tipo de programas en los diferentes países donde trabajamos. Buscamos mucho conocer las necesidades, conocer los desafíos y conocer las oportunidades que las organizaciones, como en el caso de ustedes, pueden tener, de manera que les ayudemos a que ustedes, a través de sus diferentes proyectos, puedan aportar y generar mayor valor, ¿verdad? Eso es parte de lo que nosotros buscamos mucho. Sabemos que son proyectos relativamente cortos, de 12 meses, pero por lo tanto, pues cada uno de ustedes han venido desarrollando su respectiva estrategia de manera que generen el impacto deseado, el impacto esperado. Repito, como nosotros como organizaciones en los diferentes países, eso es un aspecto muy fundamental que buscamos, ¿verdad? No solo venir nosotros a desarrollar un proyecto que posiblemente una organización, en este caso el Departamento de Estado de Estados Unidos, nos ha brindado, nos ha dado la oportunidad de desarrollar, pero sí buscamos mucho que de una manera muy responsable como nosotros ejecutamos, buscamos que ustedes también como organizaciones que han sido recientemente seleccionadas, pues ejecuten sus programas, ¿verdad?, de la mejor manera posible. Sabemos, y para eso ha sido esta competición que hemos desarrollado, ¿verdad?, que es la primera de 3 que vamos a tener durante 4 años, han sido ustedes seleccionados por algo, ¿verdad?, porque tienen programas y han mostrado estrategias acorde a las necesidades donde ustedes ya vienen trabajando. De esa manera, pues buscamos nosotros que al final de los 12 meses podamos medir y podamos a lo largo de estos meses monitorear lo que ustedes van a ir implementando, ¿verdad? Para ello estaremos nosotros de cierta forma como diferentes equipos coordinados internamente que vendremos a ser de cierta forma como mentores para todos ustedes. De igual manera, y así como hemos venido trabajando desde el 2014, donde hemos ido incluyendo a diferentes organizaciones que ahora son miembros de la red, para nosotros es de suma importancia, como mencionó Patricia, que ahora contamos con 8 nuevas organizaciones. Ya después ustedes van a ir conociendo un poco más qué implica, qué beneficios conlleva, ¿verdad?, el formar parte de la red de innovación e impacto. Pero en realidad es algo que comenzó como una iniciativa hace casi 10 años, como mencioné, y que ahora en realidad ha aportado muchos beneficios. Nos sentimos todos muy orgullosos como equipo, WEC, NBC, Incubatec también, Bastel, donde a través de nuestro esfuerzo hemos venido a apoyar a más de 5,000 MIPYMES en Latinoamérica, en 11 países. Y la gran mayoría continúan, tal vez algunas más con mayor empeño, mayor esfuerzo, y tal vez otras un poco menos, pero de ahí con toda esta experiencia que venimos generando, pues tenemos, gracias a Dios, ahora la oportunidad de ese bagaje que hemos desarrollado nosotros como equipo conjunto, pues compartirles a ustedes las organizaciones que ahora nos acompañan aquí, ¿verdad? Entonces, para nosotros lo vemos más que un reto, en realidad una oportunidad, tanto de compartir como igualmente para nosotros de crecimiento como a las instituciones que representamos, ¿verdad? Igualmente somos muy conscientes y debemos de tener la humildad suficiente para saber que podemos aprender muchísimo con quienes compartimos nuestros programas, ¿verdad? Y sabemos que así será. Por último, pues a través de este Summit, como ya mencionó Patricia, ¿verdad?, vamos a conocer diferentes proyectos, tendremos diferentes personas que nos irán aportando diferentes aspectos muy relacionados, por ejemplo, donde nos interesa a nosotros que aparte de este grant que ustedes están recibiendo, pues conozcan también de otras oportunidades que pueden haber, ¿verdad?, para ustedes en su beneficio en sus diferentes comunidades. Y pues bueno, quiero terminar deseándoles el mayor de los éxitos a todos ustedes y que sus proyectos realmente generen impacto, generen cambios, de manera que podamos tener una mayor prosperidad y una mejor sociedad, ¿verdad? Que eso es lo que todos buscamos aquí en Latinoamérica. Así es que muchas gracias y sean pues todos bienvenidos y será un placer estar con ustedes e irlos conociendo cada vez más. Bienvenidos y felicitaciones. Gracias.
Bueno, muy buenos días, un gusto de verlos a todos. Estamos atrasados a tiempo, así que me voy a saltar los vocativos. Jeff, gracias por estar y la oportunidad que nos dan. ¿Saben? Para nosotros igual es, como núcleo de tecnología de Curauma, también es un poco emocionante estar acá y tener la oportunidad de también participar de este proyecto. Cuando Ernesto conversaba de que todo esto se inició el 2014, nosotros el 2014 estábamos en la mesa de ustedes, participando también, ¿cierto?, de esta oportunidad de generar impacto, de desarrollar proyectos sostenibles, proyectos con impacto, llegar a las personas, mejorar la calidad de vida de las personas. Y fue una oportunidad grande, aprendimos mucho y luego fue replicado y lo fuimos replicando y la verdad es que el impacto fue inimaginable en esa oportunidad cuando estábamos sentados en la mesa de ustedes. Por eso la verdad es que estamos contentos. Cuando se hizo el concurso hubo muchas postulaciones y ustedes fueron los elegidos. Y bueno, ustedes tienen una oportunidad, pero también tienen una responsabilidad de efectivamente desarrollar sus proyectos, mejorar, ¿cierto? Mejorar la realidad de las mujeres en Latinoamérica, desarrollar las pymes y mejorar la calidad de vida, con desarrollo, con sostenibilidad y sobre todo con las buenas ideas que ustedes representan. Esas ideas que lo hicieron estar aquí hoy día. Y también, ¿cierto?, participar e ingresar, ya les vamos a dar la bienvenida respectiva a la Red de Innovación e Impacto. Ahí tienen ¿cómo decirlo? ¿Ah? Su logo corpóreo, pero es como la luz que los va a iluminar. Así que bueno, con la hija Pato vamos a recuperar tiempo. Muchas gracias y bienvenidos y bueno, a sacarle provecho a estos 2 días de intensa actividad. Gracias.
En lo personal debo decir que me emociona escucharlo a Rolando, bueno, y también las palabras un poco retomando la historia de Ernesto, porque fuimos desde el inicio, yo también parte del equipo, ya hace casi 10 años, y el proyecto no solo ayudó a mejorar la calidad de vida de las comunidades donde trabajamos, sino también a nosotros como personas y como equipo. A nosotros nos cambió a nivel personal y profesional por la calidad de vínculos también que se generaron y por los impactos que se lograron llevar a cabo. Así que estamos por eso también muy entusiasmados porque sabemos que con esta primer cohorte de 8 organizaciones vamos a lograr lo mismo y mucho más, que uno nunca sabe. Bueno, dando continuidad a la agenda de hoy, ustedes después del taller con WEC, que va a ser más interno, administrativo y de gestión, van a tener un encuentro con el Departamento de Estado, con Thomas y con James que nos acompañan para poder conversar directamente con ellos. Pero ahora sí quisiera darle la palabra a Thomas Jeffrey. Él es el oficial de Asuntos Exteriores para la Oficina de Asuntos del Hemisferio Occidental del Departamento de Estado de los Estados Unidos. Para nosotros es un embajador porque nos viene acompañando desde la Red de Innovación de Impacto también en la implementación de estos proyectos, así que es muy importante que hoy pueda estar aquí con nosotros. Y como les comentaba anteriormente, él va a hacer una conferencia, una presentación para brindar algunas herramientas, asesoramiento sobre cómo solicitar proyectos y financiamiento para ayuda exterior. Así que, Tomás, te dejamos aquí tu espacio. Muchas gracias.
Sorry that I can't do this in Spanish. Thank you everyone for coming here today. I'm honored to be here today. My name is Thomas Jeffrey. I'm the Senior Program Officer in the U.S. Department of State Bureau of Western Hemisphere Affairs in the Office of Planning and Coordination. The goal of this speech is to provide information about U.S. federal assistance and share best practices on proposals to apply for U.S. grants. The reason the Bureau of Western Hemisphere Affairs is providing this information is we would like to increase the capacity of Red de Innovación Impact members through the Empower Innovation Challenge to ensure sustainability of the network beyond the period of performance of the overall grant with World Environment Center. Before I start, though, I would like to congratulate WEC for your leadership for the first cohort of Empower Innovation Challenge and the creation of the Red de Innovación Network. I also would like to congratulate Pastel for the years of hard work on the results-based frameworks, and Nuclear Biotecnología de Curarama, NBC, for actively seeking the community-based solutions that can help women-owned small businesses in Latin America and the Caribbean grow. The creation of the Empower Innovation Challenge was a novel approach of development assistance, and we took a big risk in WHA. The idea of the project started with a concept paper, and that's it. Seeing all of you here today and hearing NBC and WEC enthusiastic updates of the success of the network and your individual project ideas gives credence to the concept paper's innovative ideas. As many of you know, the RED project implementers, the best and innovative solutions already existed within the communities of the project's beneficiary countries, and all that was needed was access to a network that could help bring local community ideas to scale. Before we start the discussion about U.S. federal assistance, I'd like to give you a little bit of background about the Bureau of Western Hemisphere, Strategy Resource Unit, and Policy Planning Coordination Office that we work in. We work with U.S. Embassy, consulates, and USAID for strategic processes for planning of U.S. federal assistance for the entire Western Hemisphere. So oftentimes, we are looking at budgets from a macro level. So we're looking at from the entire region. The question you might ask is, what is U.S. foreign assistance? The concept dates to the Marshall Plan and is U.S. aid to European allies after World War II. U.S. foreign assistance was formally authorized into U.S. law during the Kennedy administration. The authorities provided under this assistance are broad and have had many amendments over time. At any given time, the U.S. government agencies work on as many as 4 different fiscal years, so there's no way to complete a single year at a time before starting on the next year. Budget usually development begins 20 months prior to beginning of a fiscal year. That's why we had to create a concept paper for this project years in advance. The entire budget process for a single year's appropriation can last for up to 5 years. Most foreign assistance accounts are multi-year funds, and state and USAID manage the majority of the foreign assistance, although there are other U.S. agencies you can look for funding, such as Department of Treasury, Millennium Corporation, Peace Corps, Export-Import Bank, Overseas Private Investment Corporation, and the U.S. Trade Development Agency. They all have their own foreign assistance account that NGOs can apply for. Programming U.S. foreign assistance is a complicated process that includes apportionment from Congress, operational plans, congressional notifications, and open grant competitions. Now that I've given you a background and the summary of U.S. foreign assistance, I'd like to discuss the first stage of the foreign assistance lifecycle, which includes the information you will need to apply for in the future. This is important information in helping you plan your application processes for future open grant competitions, because the whole idea of this Empower Innovation Challenge is to build the capacity of your organizations and NGOs in the region so you can continue to apply for more funding. In a pre-award process, the U.S. government agency designs a Notice of Funding Opportunity, commonly known as a NOFO. The NOFO is the announcement tool for obligation processes of U.S. foreign assistance. This is what WEC, World Environment Center, and NBC applied for the Empower Innovation Challenge. This is very important when you're applying for larger grants. The objectives and the goals of NOFO are either to meet a U.S. government policy goal, or could also be driven by U.S. congressional earmark or attribution. In the case of the Empower Innovation Challenge project, implemented by NBC, WEC, and Bestel, it seeks to empower women-owned micro, small, and medium enterprises, SMEs, to scale up their businesses through a series of small grants focused on local solutions and green and blue economies in Latin America and Caribbean. However, this wasn't our funding. This was funded by the Department of State's Secretary of Gender Women's Initiative, SGW's 2021 Global Equity and Equality Fund, managed. We applied for it and we got $3.5 million in funding. So this is the first cohort of that project. This project, which you're participating in, has small grants that will provide training and access to capital, networking, and partnerships opportunities with local and international businesses. If you apply for grants in the future, in drafting the NOFO, the U.S. government agency will scope the project using SMART objectives, or the process might start even earlier with a concept paper. If you don't know what SMART objectives are, the acronym stands for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-framed. So we had to look at your small grants from the local, the idea was from, instead of top down, from bottom up. So we had to look at objectives from local solutions that then would flow up into overall project outcomes and outputs that we could report from. The NOFO provides the guidelines for prospective applicants on what is required to apply in the competition. I cannot emphasize enough, when you draft your proposals for future funding, you must address every single item that's requested in the NOFO as to meet the requirements of the proposal submission instructions. This is important to note because if the proposal does not address everything requested in the NOFO, it will not make it through the program officer's technical review process. So we've had many good proposals in the past that are submitted that have an incredible proposal narrative, but they left out 1 or 2 documents or an item that was listed in the NOFO, and we had to disqualify it. So you could put in a lot of hours of work, and if you did not create a checklist before submitting, you might disqualify yourself before it even goes to a selection panel. When submitting your proposals, please double check that you've completed and signed all documents. This includes the SF 424. Make sure that you have the proposal narrative, monitoring and evaluation plan, roles and responsibility, detailed timeline of activities, budget narrative, detailed line item budget, and response. You need to make sure that you go through your proposal narrative and make sure it responds to the NOFO goals and objectives, as well as it includes all required outcome and output indicators. This process that you went through with WEC on the first cohort of Empower Innovation Challenge, all the documents that they required you to submit, all the revisions, that is to start preparing you so you can apply for larger grants, $100,000, $250,000, $500,000 grants, because the larger amount of funding, the more complicated the process gets. The first page of the NOFO includes important application information, including announcement type, funding amount, issuance date, funding activity category, assistance type, eligibility category. Please pay attention to each and every detail and provide accurate information. Larger NGOs have large grants teams, and they usually have somebody, after their application team drafts the proposal, somebody that has not worked on it, they have that person go through and they have a checklist, and they go through each and every document. The next section of the NOFO is the executive summary. In this section, the U.S. government agency is providing a summary of goals and objectives that the applicant's proposal must address. Then the background section usually provides the applicant the context of issues, challenges, or policy goals that the U.S. government agency is trying to address. The key areas to the focus in the NOFO are the goals and objectives. Make sure that all project activities for the proposal scope of work address the overall objective. So oftentimes we have NGOs that create a very good project idea, and they have their clear goal, but then their objectives do not connect to that goal, and then the project activities don't connect to the objective that connect to the goal. So please make sure that you double check when you write it, that the flow from the bottom of the project activities then relate to the objectives, then to the goal. One of the most important sections of the NOFO is the desired results indicators section that requires the applicant create a monitoring and evaluation plan. A common mistake that applicants make is this section is that they submit a logical framework for the indicators without a written plan. So we oftentimes get a spreadsheet of just the indicators of the output and outcome goals. You always have to create a written section of how you're going to implement your M&E plan and how those indicators tie back to your project, and then how you're going to monitor it. You also need to include how you're going to monitor if you have any subcontracts or subawardees. It's important to note this. For this reason, the proposal will be knocked points in the panel review if it is not complete. Please ensure that M&E plans include a written plan how your organization plans to monitor and evaluate the project monitoring, financial reporting, in addition to including logical framework indicator data. So you need to include a financial section of how you're going to do your accounting, your payment requests, and your financial monitoring of the overall program activities. In creating the logical framework for the project, applicants must ensure they address all required outcome and output indicators. Usually the NOFO will list required indicators and then suggested indicators. The suggested indicators give the grantee the opportunity to create their own specific indicators, but you also always need to follow what the U.S. government agency required indicators are. These are oftentimes called F indicators, at least within Department of State of USAID. Other government agencies have different indicators, but these are the indicators that we have to track as a government agency. Then we report back to offices within Department of State, and then that goes back to Congress that could impact future funding. So it is very important that we get accurate data from NGOs that are implementing projects. The majority of applicants find the most difficult in designing a project proposal is creating an effective budget and budget narrative to match the project activities. The applicant must design a budget that accurately reflects project activities and allow your organization to successfully implement the project. I cannot reiterate how critical this stage of the application process is for the applicant to have a strong proposal. A poorly designed budget and budget narrative will get knocked points during their panel review. So we always have a standard, it's called reasonable, allowable, and allocable. So reasonable means, are you submitting a laptop for $5,000 or $1,500? During the panel review, they're going to question if you submit a very expensive item that may not be reasonable if you're an organization and you're managing budget. So, and then also please use the template that's provided. We have NGOs that submit budget templates that are outside of what's suggested. And then the detailed line item budget and the budget narrative always need to match. And you need to break out items by unit cost, per unit cost, and total cost. So you always need to break down the different items of your budget. As I was mentioning, designing a budget, applicant must use the OMB cost category template that is provided by the U.S. government agency. This is suggested for all U.S. government agencies implementing funding, if this is USAID, or Peace Corps, or Department of State, or the Millennium Corporation. There will be the standard OMB, which is the Office of Management Budget, which is an executive office under the White House. Do not submit a budget in a different format, as it could get impacted during the review process of the panel. For all budget line item costs, it must fall under the 2 CFR 200. If you do not know what the 2 CFR 200 is, I recommend after this summit that you immediately go and get your team to learn it, because it provides the guidance and regulations of how U.S. foreign assistance and U.S. taxpayer dollars are managed. Every grant that it's managed by the U.S. government, if it's NIH, CDC, U.S. Department of State, follows under the 2 CF 200. It gives you what the rules are for spending. For example, you cannot buy alcohol for entertainment purposes under a U.S. government-funded grant. USAID and Department of State, mostly Department of State, unless it's depending on the funding, for economic support funds, you can't do construction. It will provide clear rules of what you can do with this funding. Under the 2 CFR 200, it provides the regulations and guidance, and as what I mentioned earlier, it provides what is allowable, allocable, and reasonable. Examples of unallowable expenses include anything related, as I said, construction, alcohol, and any costs related for entertainment purposes. Allocable must be treated consistently with other costs incurred for the same purposes and like circumstances. Number one, this is important to note. There's 3 things in looking at. Number one, is it insured specifically for the award? Is it incurred specifically award? You can't use grant funds for anything that's outside the project activities. Does it benefit both the award and other work, and can it be distributed in reasonable proportion to the benefits received? Number 3, is it necessary for the overall operation of the organization? So what is a reasonable cost? Does the cost exceed what would be incurred by a prudent person under the circumstances prevailing at the time of this decision was made to incur the cost? That is, what would a prudent person think these costs are reasonable? Now I'm going to provide some additional information on how you determine different cost types. What is a direct cost? Generally, if a cost can be identified specifically for a particular cost objective, such as a grant or cooperative agreement, project, services, or other activity of the organization, is a direct cost. So we oftentimes get NGOs that submit incorrect indirect cost rates and incorrect direct cost rates. Panelists, when they review this, they will notify this. They will notify that the budget is not cost effective, the grantee didn't know what they were doing, and you may not make it to being a finalist. So you really need to understand how to set up a correct budget. What is an indirect cost? It is a cost that has been incurred for a common or joining objectives of an organization that can be readily identified with a particular cost objective. Items such as rent, cell phone, the cost of cell phones, or the management of leadership of the grant implementation. Let's say you're a chapter of a larger organization that's managed from a different country or a different part of the country you live within. Their management of the grant would be considered an indirect cost rate. So US-based organizations such as universities can charge a NICRA, which they can negotiate with the US government for indirect cost rates. Overseas NGOs cannot negotiate a NICRA rate, but what they can do is use a 10% de minimis rate. It's called the Modified Total Direct Cost, MTDC. So if you don't want to break out each individual indirect cost, you have two choices. You either break out each individual indirect cost or you use the de minimis rate. This 10% allows you to, as an organization, to list all of your indirect cost rates. This provision is designed to allow entities that have never previously obtained an indirect cost rate to develop the capacity to engage in full negotiations. Or it is also allowed for international NGOs. So this item is also very important to understand. Years ago, many US government agencies would require that you include mandatory cost share. So let's say your grant, you got $100,000 from the US government, then you provided $25,000 in cost share. Or matching, let's say you had to do matching of 50% or 1-to-1 of 100%. US Department of State no longer requires a mandatory cost share. It is reviewed under the panel, but doesn't necessarily make your proposal stronger. And it is important to note, if you list cost share, let's say you list $25,000 in cost share, and then during an audit, we do site visits to grantees, which is basically an audit. There's either a programmatic, which is just viewing to ensure that project activities are correctly implemented, and then there's a financial site visit. If during that site visit, it is noted that you did not provide the cost share that you said you were going to, the US government can require you to pay back that cost share to them. So it is very important that you accurately include your cost share and that you don't put in more cost share than that your organization can provide. In designing your budget narrative, it should speak to the technological or line item budget and vice versa. Budget notes should allow the reader to repeat the calculation and match each line item in the detailed line item budget. Time and again, every panel that we have budgets that their breakdown, let's say it is you're traveling and you have 5 participants that are staying in hotels of $100, and then you list $800 for the amount for lodging. During the panel review process, they're going to say, this organization didn't do a good job managing their budget, their line items don't match, and then their thought's going to be, will they be able to effectively implement the project? You may not make it to being a finalist, so please, please, always double check, have your accountant double check your proposal and review each budget line item to make sure that the numbers are accurate. Now that we've covered best practices for filing out a project proposal, I would like to quickly go over grants.gov. I would highly recommend each and every one of you that attends this conference look at grants.gov. It is a website portal for all available grant competitions and cooperative agreements created by US government agencies. There's over $700 billion in funding, grant funding, that's listed on usgrants.gov. This is CDC, this is USAID, this is Department of State. Even embassies, when they have their US embassies that are in your host country, when they list, they have their proposals go up on grants.gov. Although it looks a little daunting, it's basically like Google. You just put in the search function of, let's say you're working on environment projects or climate change. You just put in climate change and it will list all the proposals. If you want to narrow it down even further, let's say you're out of Costa Rica, you put climate change Costa Rica, and then it'll narrow down the proposals to that. Or if you want to narrow it down to even further geographic location. So you just go in there and you start playing with words until you get, then it'll list the proposals, and they have different review criteria or filters to allow you to narrow it down to the exact proposals that you review. And don't just do a shotgun approach of applying to like 10 different proposals. Make it very specific to the proposal you're applying. We oftentimes get a proposal for different funding opportunities that we have. That's what it's called when you provide new funding to civil society. The applicants, the same applicant will submit basically the same proposal that they submitted for a proposal of here with slight tweaks, and then it won't get good ratings within the panel review process. So please make sure that your proposals are very specific to the funding opportunity. Now I'd like to give specific advice, that is, if you see a grant announcement that does not relate to your organizations or programs outside of your organization's normal bandwidth, I would recommend against applying. We also have this issue where we might have an organization that works on, their main goal is HIV or health services, and then they're applying for an environmental-based project because a small part of their team works on environmental health issues. Please always make it specific to your organization's goals and mission, to the proposal that you're applying for. Because part of the panel review process is they will look at your institutional capacity. So part of you being part of Red is now that you can show that you've managed $50,000. When review panels review applicants, they will see that you've now managed $50,000 in U.S. government funding. So if you apply for a grant that's $100,000 or $150,000 or $200,000, they will see that you have had experience in managing U.S. government funding. All right, this concludes my speech for today. I'd like to thank all of the Red members and the first cohort of the Empower Innovation Challenge small grantees. They've traveled far and wide to come to this summit. I look forward to seeing all of your small grant projects come into fruition with the innovative solutions to the challenges of inclusive economic growth in Latin America and the Caribbean. We look forward to hearing about your progress in the future. Thank you so much for applying, and good luck.